Global democracy really depends on a strong American democracy.
The way that democracies die today is not the way it died 50 or 60 years ago. We usually think of a violent takeover, seizure of power. Today, the dominant way in which democracies die is much more subtle.
Really, populists rise to power through election.
It's not easy. Democracy is hard.
We have to fight for it every day.
That was just part of the trailer for a new documentary, Dismantling Democracy. It premiered at the Virginia Film Festival last week, and it looks at government structures in the U.S. and around the world facing resistance. On Wednesday, the president of Chile canceled next month's APEC summit following several weeks of violent protests there. Violence has also been gripping Iraq lately, the country dealing with unprecedented anti-government protests. And pro-democracy protests are still simmering in Hong Kong. They began back in June over a proposed extradition bill. Larry Sabato is the executive producer of the film. He's also the director of the University of Virginia's Center for Politics. All you politics nerds like me will recognize him, a regular feature in the world of politics. Larry, great to have you speak with us about this. And in this trailer for the film, you say that if the current system continues without reform, you think there's a very real possibility of violence and potentially a split here in the United States. Explain that for us a bit more.
Well, that's long-term, of course, or at least we hope it's long-term. But, Errol, the point of this three-part series that will be on public television next year is that democracy is in decline in many places, and there are signs that authoritarianism is on the rise. Now, the United States has lots of checks and balances built in, but it can happen here, too. It can happen here, and that's what's really important for people to know so that they can go to work to prevent it.
And so what are the biggest threats to American democracy right now?
Well, I would name ignorance at the top, because civic education, an understanding of how the system works, a dialogue with people who are not like you so that immigrants are less threatening, so that the fact that by 2050 or sooner, a majority of Americans will be non-white, these things do not frighten you the way, unfortunately, millions seem to be concerned about them today. Now, that's education, Errol. There's no substitute for it. And there's also something called the vote. And 40% of Americans do not show up at all. 40%, even for presidential elections. In some cases, it's 50, 60, 70% don't show up, but regularly 40% just don't show. We've got to change that.
You know, and there are some that believe that's by design. You know, it's one of these few countries where having an election isn't a holiday. It's difficult for folks to get to polling locations. And of course, there's this effort of misinformation, so people don't know when or where to go. I do want to ask you about elections next week. Kentucky and Mississippi voting for their governors, and Virginia's holding a General Assembly election. You have a preview in your latest crystal ball, and in it, it says, quote, "In an era of political polarization, or nationalization that is bleeding down the ballot, even to state-level races, the best bet in all three states would be to go with partisanship." What are you basing that view on?
Well, a whole series of elections in all 50 states over the past 30 years. We've moved in the direction of, as you were suggesting, polarization, party polarization. More states than ever are one-party states. They really only elect at the statewide level or for president members of either the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. This is not a good thing. You need good competition. So in Mississippi's as dark red as you can get, meaning it's very, very, very Republican. And even though there's a strong Democratic candidate, the Republican is very likely to win, in part because Mississippi doesn't leave it to the voters. Once the voters have cast their ballots, in many cases it goes to the legislature, which is heavily Republican. Naturally, they would vote for a Republican in most cases. Kentucky has turned very red. They're electing a governor. That one's close because the incumbent Republican governor is personally unpopular. But it seems to us that because Kentucky is so red and because that Republican governor is bringing in President Trump on election eve, that he will have the edge. I wouldn't be shocked if there were an upset there, but but the Republican starts out with the edge. In Virginia, Democrats are doing well here. No Republican has been elected statewide since 2009. We think the Democrats will win at least one house of the state legislature. They might win both.
Your new documentary is called Dismantling Democracy, and I can't say this enough for our viewers. If someone like Larry Sabato is saying American democracy is at risk, listen up, folks. Great to chat with you, Larry. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Errol. Thanks a lot.